Good evening, Matt.
Hey Graham, good to see you.
Welcome to the Crazy in Love podcast, where two psychotherapists talk about modern relationships. Matt, tonight we're going to be talking about Mel Robbins and, in particular, her theory called Let Them. She's written a book called Let Them. It's a New York Times bestseller. She's got a very, very popular podcast, which is built partly on the success of that idea in that book. If you haven't heard of Mel Robbins, you will do at some point, I imagine. She's in podcast world almost as successful as the likes of Joe Rogan. Matt, she's someone who I think before she became an author was a lawyer. I think she's fundamentally just made her business based on self-help. The let them idea is as simple as it sounds, isn't it? Which is it's a two-word mantra for going through life, which is fundamentally the idea that instead of getting worked up about what other people do, particularly in relationships, we should let them. We should not get so angry at other people for their actions. We should not get so upset if they hurt us. We should simply let them do what they're going to do and relinquish control. Is it that simple? Is there more to the idea than that? And why has it been so helpful for so many millions of people over
Yeah,
the world?
I think it probably is that simple, isn't it? As I encountered it and understood it, I think the answer is why has it been so successful and why has it resonated? Because it's as old as the hills, isn't it? It's as old as time. It's most obviously drawn from Buddhism, that kind of acceptance tradition. I think, accept what you can't change. We were talking about the serenity prayer before we pressed record on this pod, and we used to say that. I don't know whether we said it every day in my secondary school, but we said it, I think, in every assembly.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Saying it, which was at least 2 or 3 times a week from memory. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, courage to change the things I can, wisdom to know the difference. If people don't know that prayer, it's been around for a very long while. It's a really big part of Alcoholics Anonymous and 12-step recovery as well. That kind of idea that you have to accept something. The first step of Alcoholics Anonymous or any 12-step change program is that you acknowledge, you accept that you are an alcoholic or an addict of some description. So I think it's ancient wisdom, somewhat repackaged for modern times. It's also been a part of, good luck to her, right? Because she's hit upon something and it's not a terrible idea. It's definitely not her idea. It's through the self-help literature. I was just looking back.
She says her daughter came up with it, which again is
frankly, with respect to her,
I think some of the Stoics would beg to differ, but fair enough. If you can make millions, good luck to you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's written through a book like, it's a bit of an old sort of book now. I don't know whether people even know it, but The Road Less Traveled by Scott Peck is like, it's shot through with that notion, don't sweat the small stuff, which was a massive self-help book a while back. It's the basic essence of that idea, the subtle art of not giving up. I'm not sure if we can say the rest of that sentence on this pod, but that book by Mark Manson is exactly the same idea, really, that you don't need to get worked up, and basically that our notion that we can control the outside world is somewhat illusory, huh?
So let's bring that into the world of relationships. How have you seen this be useful in maybe your own personal relationships or in those where you've been working with couples?
Yeah. So I think it's pretty sound, isn't it? I think it's pretty sensible. I think the therapeutic formulations of it, like for example, in a type of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, usually called ACT for short, I think are far more helpful and nuanced, because what ACT would say is it's not just like let other people do their thing, which I think is a bit partial.
Yeah.
It's sort of like you're gonna have to let your feelings be your feelings as well, I think, is the kind of central insight from ACT that I take, that the idea that we can control our feelings is an illusion as well. And that's probably the idea that I use most in therapy. So you can feel any way you want, but you can also put a behavioral break on that. So when I think about my boys who are 9 and 10 and how they behave, they're often furious with one another. They've spent this weekend being very grumpy with one another. And like their desire when they're really mad and angry is to hit out at one another. And I'm saying to them, as I say to clients as well, you can have those feelings, but you can't smash the Xbox console, and you can't slam the door, and you can't punch your brother in the face, even if you want to. And I think in relationships, some of what I'm saying is if you wouldn't do that at work, if you wouldn't do that amongst your friendship group, then you can also bite your tongue and be respectful to the other person and point out where they're irritating you, upsetting you, disappointing you, letting you down or what. So something about like, yeah, the feeling's there, but there is a moment, there's a pause point. You can accept that feeling, and then you can choose to some extent whichever behavior you want on the back of it.
And that would be in Mel Robbins's theory and in her books, the let me turn, isn't it? So she's got let them, which is don't worry too much about how other people are behaving. Don't respond to how other people are behaving. Let them take care of themselves. But then there's the let me bit, which is the other side of the coin, which is you've still got to take responsibility for yourself and how you respond to their behavior. So it's not a theory that says that you should just accept all sorts of horrible behavior in a relationship. You just shouldn't expect you shouldn't expect to change the other person or try to change them necessarily. This is a bit I want to come back to, is the trying to change someone's behavior. But you should take responsibility for how you act within the relationship. Let's just stay on the idea of the example of your two boys, because I don't imagine you're saying to one of them, if the other one is kind of getting quite aggressive, oh, he's just being him, don't worry, don't worry about how he's behaving to you. I don't imagine you take a let them approach to parenting. I imagine you say, yeah, of course it's wrong, like it's not acceptable. You're not teaching a kind of Zen Buddhism type approach to parenting, I wouldn't imagine, are you?
No, certainly not like not permissive in that way at all. And no, I mean, I would say it's got like real and obvious limits, isn't it? As soon as you start thinking of transgressive behavior in any sort of relationship or in society at large or between siblings, it sort of breaks down really, which is why I think the let them or, let me is fine as far as it goes, but doesn't really go far enough and isn't quite subtle enough. I would say, like within Buddhism, without boring on about that, I don't think that's what's being said or intended in that either, that you take a passive quietist
No,
style.
I don't think we should spend too long on that, because I don't think Mel Robbins is advocating that either, to be fair to her. She's certainly not advocating kind of you should accept emotional or physical abuse in any sense in a relationship. I don't think she would advocate that you should just allow someone to be mean to you from time to time. I think that that's the kind of let me bit of the response is
Yeah.
I take responsibility for myself and I respect myself and my boundaries and I push back.
It mostly doesn't do you that much good, does it? You can think of situations where you need to put a boundary down, and you could probably think of 100 more where you just don't need to fuss over it or worry about it. Someone cutting you up in traffic is often the sort of classic example. And in Buddhism, like you're holding onto a burning stone. It's like you let that go, right? It's not. You're not doing anything to the other person usually if you're up their arse in the car or you're flipping them off or whatever it is. It's like it either escalates to a point of stupidity or risk for one or other of you, or it does precisely nothing other than getting you incredibly wound up and over invested and unduly focused on a negative bit of passing nothing, right? There are better things to think about, better things to focus on, right?
So my challenge to the theory, and maybe we can go into this now, segue to this, is that it doesn't really help you on more of the nuanced cases in most relationships. So the examples that you've just used are relatively isolated extreme cases, right? So someone cuts you up in traffic, they're not that important to you. It doesn't really matter. It's a short-term thing. You can take responsibility for not responding and let them be them, right? Fine.
Yep.
What about a partner who struggles with substance abuse? All right. You're in a relationship with someone who is struggling day to day, is acting in certain ways that are not good for them, not good for you in the relationship. What is the day-to-day use of let them theory in that kind of context? How does it help someone decide whether they need to confront their partner, whether they need to leave that partner, whether they need to respect themselves more in terms of making sure they're not the recipient of any kind of negative, bad behavior? Like, how does that help them? Help me understand how this helps them in any way.
I think in that instance, and if you were broadening it out and allow it to be a kind of shorthand for something like acceptance and commitment therapy, or like the way I would sort of tend to think about the world, I do think that's quite a useful framework. I think there is something about, like, there is a limit to what you can do in so many walks of life. So I think if you've got a partner who is, I don't know, the example you gave, who is in active addiction and unable to deal with that, unable to seek support or avail themselves of, you know, ways of getting clear of that addiction, then the let them would be something like, this isn't going to work. And tragic though it is, and heartbreaking though it is, you're going to have to step away from that situation. You're going to have to let them be an addict. You're going to have to let them be addicted. Like, there is a moment, I think the bit of wisdom that is contained in it is there is a moment which just doesn't belong to you. You can lead a horse to water. You can invite them to 12-step recovery, other forms of recovery. You can check them into a rehab.
Sure. Okay. Take it back a step, take it back 5-10 years and say, okay, on the journey to substance abuse, do you let them take all those micro decisions along the way, right? There's the and what's the interplay between let them do their thing and you leaning in to say, I'm worried about you. I don't think that's okay. That's not just about you and your feelings. That's about worrying about a friend or a loved one or a partner, and leaning in and say, I'm worried about you. I want you to change your behavior for yourself.
I think it's the bit where it runs out of road, right? So it isn't the framework or the mantra that I would use in those situations, because in something like, I don't know, if you were closer to thinking about acceptance and commitment therapy, or even Buddhism more generally, as I would understand it and take it to be applicable in life, you are still speaking up for the values that you hold dear, the things that are important to you. So, I mean, I would be bringing something to you if we were, you know, if we were falling out about something, you and I, Graham, or you were doing something that was bugging me, I would say, you're consistently late for these calls. You never are. I don't think you've ever once been late, but were you to be, you know, I might raise that, right? And you might respond, and that would be okay. But I mean, if it was occasional and it was a minute, in the way that I'm sometimes late for you, you might just let me occasionally be late.
Yeah, and wonder why it's bugging me so much, right? And just say, it seems to be irritating me that Matt is 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes late. Is it that important? Should I just let him do that a few times rather than reacting from that place? Yeah, I think
that's what you and I talk a lot about in relationships. So with those moments where, like, you might be advised to bite your tongue, you know. So it's not very popular modern relationship advice, is it? We should speak about everything, every infringement, every feeling, all the time, as soon as they occur. And the bit of let them that I quite like is, like, maybe you don't need to talk about every infringement and every moment and everything that your partner does that's like slightly bugged you, because broadly they're really kind to you, they're really considerate, they're terrific at making a home and, you know, looking after your kids and generating fun, and they've got lovely friends, and they're a really nice person, and also they're a bit messy, and also they're a bit late sometimes, and also they're forgetful, you know. But I think if it really, really, really bugs you, then I wouldn't let them. I think the opposite of that advice. The reason I don't like any of those mantras is, what is good advice to you is going to be terrible advice for me or for someone else. So for clients who are full of their preferences and how important their opinions are, I would be saying, should we ease off those things? For clients who are scared of their own shadow and find it very difficult to speak up, ask for a pay raise, ask somebody out, believe that they are valuable in the world or they can take up space, I would be prescribing something of the opposite. That makes sense.
It definitely makes sense. The bit that I didn't want to lose and I wanted to come back to from what you've just been saying is the value orientated approach, that you're saying that the way that you use, or a template that you use for leaning into those moments where you do challenge someone else's behaviors, is a values based one. So when thinking about the let them theory, I was thinking of an example of kind of around less in a romantic relationship and more a kind of awkward uncle or auntie around the Christmas table, kind of saying something that you disapprove of. Like, you see them once a year. they're a bit drunk, they say something slightly homophobic, slightly racist around the Christmas table. It's like, do you let them do that, or is it more let me, from a values-based place, lean in and say something? Now, that is totally dependent on you as an individual. I don't think Mel Robbins' theory helps you in that situation. I think it's ultimately a determination of, does this moment feel important enough to me from a values perspective that I'm going to lean in and create conflict and create an awkward situation? The easier option is to stand back and say nothing, but do I want to challenge myself to intervene in this situation? I don't think a theory is going to help you make that decision, but a value approach that helps you work out in your own head whether it's worth the effort and whether you should.
Yeah. And it's always a judgment, isn't it? You know, my old dad will be 90 at his next birthday, and you know, some of his language is not as progressive as the people that you and I would choose to hang out with, who are, you know, our age and younger.
We should have him as a guest on the podcast. And
I don't think he'd know what a podcast was.
That's all right. Doesn't need to. It's fine.
He'd still be able to
sit back and let him reminisce on the old times and see what happens.
He's got all his faculties as a, you know, hugely impressive guy in many respects, but I mean, his language just has not kept pace with you know, what you'd expect in a professional environment. So I think in lots of instances, you'd give him the benefit of the doubt, you'd assume good intentions, but I mean, it would change, wouldn't it? I think if you were there with, you know, somebody who was, I don't know, you're taking a mixed race partner to meet him, then there's a bit of a difference if some of the language he chooses is offensive or, you know, just horribly outdated or clumsy or whatever, then there might be a moment. And I think there's always a choice about how you do that, isn't there? Whether you do that publicly, whether you upbraid someone in front of everyone around the table, whether you have a quiet word, whether there's somebody else who can reach that person more readily than you, whether you pre-wire it because you know it might get said. So, I mean, I think all of those things are part of the mix as well. And again, I think just reducing it to, you know, that kind of catchy phrase, it will never take away that judgment, whether you do, whether you don't, and how you do those things.
Yes, I agree.
I think with my boys, the bit of let me that probably does work and might be useful is, like, I let them be angry. Like, they are allowed to be angry. I don't tell them there's no reason for them to be angry, or they shouldn't be angry, or that they really love their brother, or any of that what I consider sort of old crap. And I hear parents doing it all the time.
Because in that moment, they absolutely do not love their brother.
Angry,
absolutely hate them.
They've moved the ball when, like, they were lining up a free kick, and it's massively important if you're 9 or 10 years old, right? You know, and if that's happened 2 or 3 times and it's come on the back of, you know, you're still thinking like they got a bigger serving of something at the meal table and, you know, something else on top of that, then they've got beef, haven't they? So, I mean, that bit I think is worth, I mean, I'm probably taking the theory a bit too far, but I think, like, let's talk about that. Let's try and understand that rather than shut that up or move it on.
I don't think you're taking it too far.
Is quite useful in that respect if you're okay with, you know, going to it and leaning in the common, you know, popular parlance.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's taking the theory too far, in the sense that most of let them is about relinquishing control, isn't it? And most parental interventions are based on control. I'm not sure if I truly believe that, but you know what I mean. So there's a discomfort with a child's intensity, and we want to dampen down the intensity. So we intervene and, in effect, say, don't feel like that. So it's more about us than about them a lot of the time. Our interventions. I think what you're helpfully saying is that sometimes you can just allow them to be how they are, even if that's a tantrum in the supermarket. I just don't shut it down from your own social anxiety. Just let them do what they're going to do most of the time. And you really need to protect them.
Yeah, and I think also in that situation, I would let other parents judge me. You know, if I was
good point. Yeah,
I would also let other parents judge me. Like, I think I'd say I was firm with my boys. They definitely say I was firm with them. I think other people would probably observe that. If I say to them, like, it's time to leave, or it's time to put your shoes on, I mean it, and I'm really not intending to say it twice. And we're at a point in time where that is absolutely clear and understood. and I recognize that like there's a degree of authority that goes with that. So I am also letting other people either judge me favorably or judge me because they think, bloody hell, you know,
But
these.
this is again where the theory just falls down for me, in the sense that, well, you're letting other people judge you, but you're not letting your children do what they want to do. So the theory is both sides of the coin at any one time. It's just and it makes it pointless for me. Like, it makes
Yeah,
it
yeah, yeah. I think that's
unless it's a general kind of acceptance and commitment therapy approach, which is just pause before you react. Just make sure that it's a sensible way to react right now. I'm not sure that the theory really helps you in those situations, because
I think it might help some people who are very, very concerned about
other people's
other
viewpoint.
people thinking of.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. I think people pleasers could do with reading that book, and to have a real think about boundaries and a real think about,
Yeah.
in romantic relationships, what they're letting their partner kind of get away with. Maybe I think that's right. Maybe more from the last time we were talking a bit about attachment. I think it's more helpful for anxiously attached people than avoidantly attached people, probably.
Yeah, and I think if you were to apply it to, I was thinking about this before we spoke, and if you were to apply it to avoidantly attached people, I think there is a whiff of avoidance about it. I wonder if it lands quite well with people because it is a license, perhaps wrongly heard, but it is a license to do as you damn well please.
Nice.
Like
Yeah.
them, which is screw them. You know, it's another word for screw other people, isn't it? Or another phrase for just please yourself. And I think that bit of it probably doesn't help anybody, and kind of just feeds into a more modern notion that you should go around doing whatever it is you want. I don't really object to that on a moral basis. I just think you're going to have a miserable time if that's your stance. You know, I just don't think that gets you good stuff in the medium and long term. And that's the way I would come at it. I was thinking about cognitive behavioral therapy as well. And my sort of first encounter with therapy, goodness knows how long ago now, like 3 decades ago, was in the form of rational emotive behavioral therapy, which is a really sort of little known, not terribly popular form of therapy, but basically fits into a cognitive behavioral framework. And it lists out sort of the 4 ways in which you can make yourself kind of miserable and neurotic. So the first is if you are demanding and you have inflexible preferences. And then from there, if you find things not fitting your preference and meeting your demands awful, that's another way you can really, really upset yourself. And if on top of that you layer, I can't stand this, I can't bear this, I can't put up with it, I can't deal with frustration, you've added another layer to it, and then you sort of finally silk the system up with damnation of yourself or others. They're awful, they're terrible people for treating me this way, you know, how can they do this to me? Or I've let myself down, this is awful, this is what I always do, whatever it might be. And I think that bit is quite useful in terms of thinking through, like, are we in that moment? For me, it's probably about, the let them, if it's got any use for me, is like that's about flexible or inflexible preferences. And I think generally in life we do a bit better if we've got flexible preferences. So the inverse of all of those things would be to have some flexible preferences, to recognize that it isn't 100% awful, almost nothing is 100% awful, and to try and exhibit some degree of tolerance of frustration in those situations, and to remember that you are, entirely fallible, as is anybody else. So maybe they did cut you off in traffic, and maybe they even meant to, but is it awful? Is it the end of the world? Would you have preferred that not to happen? Sure.
In couples therapy, we're often inviting couples to talk about how the other person has affected them, how the other person has hurt them, and potentially bids for change, for behavioral change. I think that kind of model can fit with the let them theory. I think it still isn't really about fundamentally trying to change the other person. It's more about saying, even if you find this hard, even if you have to think a lot before you behave in this slightly different way, it would really mean a lot to me if you did that. I think that just about fits. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I would see that as a flexible preference, right?
Right.
a lot to me. I'd appreciate it if, is there any chance you could, what I'd really like, those sorts of formations. And if I say that to you, in your terms of your timekeeping, you can say, well, I find it very difficult to keep time, or I don't really value, your time, or whatever it might be. I don't know what the pushback would be. Maybe it's not it's too silly an example, but like, we can trade on that, can't we? You say, actually, like, it was you that set at the meeting time and it's a little too early for me, or it means I'm dashing back from a school run, or whatever else it might be, right? We can talk about that. So I think it's worth me raising it, but I think it's how you raise it and whether there's some preference, or whether there's some flexibility in that preference. You could put it as a bid. Do you mind if we move the meeting back, or can you always make sure you're logging on like a minute or two early? Because I know sometimes, like, you've not done the auto updates and then we end up losing time, or whatever it is.
Yeah, good.
There's a bit of space, isn't there? And you can say something back, actually, for whatever reason, this isn't working. And I think what I see in relationships is that people are really unwilling, unable to do that. And it surprises me, because sometimes those same people can be quite assertive at work and unassertive at home, or they can be quite brittle at home, or demanding, unreasonable at home, in a way that I would doubt really flies in a modern office place. And usually the kind of people I'm talking to are tremendously successful in the world. So we're going to assume they're doing most of the things right at work, and then when they come home they find it much more difficult. I think there are reasons for that. I think it is harder to ask. I think you're showing much more vulnerability. You've locked in old habits, and actually asking for a pay rise is easier in the end than asking to, I don't know, have more sex, or have sex of a different kind with your partner, truthfully.
Yeah, and I think that you're likely to see people who are quite high in a hierarchy as well, who have an awful lot of people that when they're asked to do something, their feelings don't really come into place. They just do it for them. Whereas they go home and they're met with their equal, and they've got to negotiate that. They've got to compromise and ask for what they want without having any kind of hierarchical structure to demand. And so I think those kind of people do often then reach to that demanding place and demand from their partner, rather than start to have a negotiation, start to have a conversation about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good. I would say the sort of trick in our job, in our world, for couples coming to see us, is both to ask for what you want and stay flexible on your preferences. And I don't think that is a paradox. I think you're asking for something. The something you're asking for might be more regular sex, or more connection, or more time together, or whatever it might be. You don't necessarily have to have already made your mind up exactly what that looks like, right? You can open the conversation with that and have a degree of flexibility around whether the more sex, time together, or whatever else happens at the weekend, or whether it's an hour or two that you mark off for yourselves, or you make sure on a Friday you're finishing at such and such a time, or you take lunch together one day a week, or you start a little later and do coffee and chat, whatever it might look like, right? That bit can be talked about and thought through. I think if you lock that down, you're probably getting into all sorts of trouble. Against that, I think sometimes it is helpful to make a proposal, right? To make a bid, to ask for something specific, rather than, because then I think it stops it being a complaint. What I hear people do is say, we never have sex anymore, or we hardly see one another, or we never eat together, or or you always make time for this but not for me. Rather than the request, the kind of the bit of longing or yearning that's behind that, and then maybe a proposal about what it could look like, with a kind of willingness to now open up the negotiation process. Like,
and I'm sure what you see that I see is that often those requests are met with a similar will or a similar interest from the other side. Like, both people probably want more sex. The question is kind of, how do you do that, and how to fit that in ways that are going to work for both of you. It's rare in relationships where one person's saying, I want more intimacy, or I want more time together, and the other person says, to be honest, I'm absolutely fine with it. Sometimes it does happen, but infrequently.
I was going to say exactly that. Sometimes you see people who are ready to split, or in fact they've already split. They just need to kind of catch the decision up with the decision that they've taken in practice. But I think for the people who are genuinely wanted to stay together, then there's often a very obvious shared agenda. I find them to be very often on the same page, and no great surprise, because they chose one another, they've stuck with it, they made a go of it. So they're often not a million miles apart, even though sometimes they think they are, they perceive themselves to be. And I suppose words like intimacy are the sort of key to that. When I hear one
Yeah.
person say intimacy, I'm like, oh, I wonder what this means. You know, does this mean, is this code for sex? Is this not saying sex in front of a virtual stranger, i.e. me? Is this polite, diplomatic, or British? Or do they mean something like, I don't know, the stuff that usually precedes sex, the build up? Are they really looking for, you know, being cozy on the sofa together? Or are they looking for the opportunity to step through the shower, get dressed up, look nice for the other person, you know, kind of wow them, show them that they're still desirable, be desired? Is it more that, or is it, you know, what is it they're looking for?
I often hear when people say that, often hear, I don't feel like you know me as well as you used to. Don't feel like you fully kind of get what it's like in my head. And I want you to know more about what that's like, what I'm carrying day to day.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
those kind of conversations that you tend to have when you're weekends away, rather than 10
Yeah.
o'clock on the sofa with a glass of wine in front of Netflix.
Yeah. 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 What
Uh,
do you do in that instance?
Say again.
What do you do in that kind of instance? I mean, I guess.
What do you do as a couple, do you mean?
Yeah, and what would you say? How do you get to unlocking that a bit? Because I guess what I'm thinking in that instance is maybe that's coming from a more female perspective, if you forgive me to be stereotypical for a few seconds. And sometimes I find there's a guy sat there thinking that is close to the last thing I want.
Uh, I think that can be the case, that the one party doesn't want to have those kind of conversations. I do find in my couples work, though, most of the time both people are feeling the same sort of frustration, that they don't have enough time to be really understood and known by their partner. And
Yeah,
that it can be things like, we're both working hard, we're both carrying a lot of stress, we're both dealing with a lot of our own feelings, and we don't go and see therapists, we don't necessarily see our friends as much as we want to, we don't really have that many people to share this stuff with, and I just feel quite lonely in the relationship because of that. And I don't think that, in my experience, is too much of a female dominated thing. I do occasionally, like, you see some couples where the one party is less interested in and needs to have those conversations about how they feel. They don't really want to or
yeah,
need them.
yeah.
But then there is a conversation about, well, it's important to your partner. How much are you willing to bend? Just a little bit. Can we help you understand what's going to feel comfortable enough for you to bend towards them in a little way that's meaningful for them? It might be a little bit awkward for you, but your partner's telling you that they really, really need this in the relationship. How much are you going to listen to that and respond to it? I think there is a bit of gentle pressure that you can legitimately put on that partner to say, your partner's telling you something serious. You're going to listen to that. You're going to respond to that, or are you just going to say, "Well, it's not for me," and turn the other cheek?
I think that's good. I would frame that, in my language, that would be sort of flexible preferences, right? That somebody's bringing something that they need, but they're willing
Always
to,
coming back to the flexible preferences.
or,
Go,
or
go on.
it's going to be met in some sort of way, right? That they might get it met imperfectly, and they might also think about
Yes.
off ramps for
Good.
that as well. They
Yeah.
might have friends and colleagues who can provide some of that, and they're not going to take a kind of it's not a zero from the partner, but it might be an understanding also that the partner is not particularly good at that.
Yep.
Finding difficult, needs to be helped, needs to be
Yep.
forgiven when they don't tune in straight away, when they don't make the right noises, maybe when they close something down, or they go to offer advice when advice wasn't being sought, that the other person can kind of steer them and help them, and there's some flex about how it gets met. And the other bit of the flexible preference that I was just thinking of when you were talking was, if it is my preference not to talk that much about my day, that is legit too, right?
Totally.
And I
Totally.
think if I find that bit, that because we've come to therapy, the answer to everything is going to be talking, you know? And I don't find that to be the answer to everything in life by any means. I think sometimes that's useful to be said by a therapist and heard from the therapist. So one of the partners doesn't necessarily want to talk about their day, that's okay. But the person on the other side does want to hear something from them, does want to do something with them that connects. So I think that not feeling heard or understood is sometimes like you're not hearing and understanding my preferences, rather than you're not hearing about how awful my day was. I didn't want to tell you that, but what I feel like you're not hearing is the fact that when I come home, I want a change of scene and I want to let loose, or I want to kick back, or I just want to have fun with you, or I want to drink together, or I want to make a meal. That makes sense?
Makes total sense, and I think you're putting your finger on why a lot of men don't want to come to couples therapy, is because they fear they're going to be told that they're wrong, that their preferences are wrong, and to make a relationship work, they need to change their preferences fundamentally. They need to want to come back home and open up about the emotional content of their day. And I think for a lot of people, and particularly a lot of men, I don't think they want to actually, or if they do, they want to once they've had a shower, done some exercise, got changed, played with the kids a bit, and had some food, and then there might be, okay, now I'm ready.
So I think that would be maybe this is the point we sign off at, but that would be a callback to let them, wouldn't it? That you could let that behavior as well, or you could at least like use that as the framework for beginning to understand that, okay, what is it about this, rather than shut this off or say it's naughty or tell them how disappointing this is. It's like, let them expand on that thought. Let them tell me why it is they don't want to talk about their day. And there's always a reason, right? What I find is there's always a reason, because it's been really, really stressful and they've been at it since early doors and they just want to stop. It's not because the other person won't understand it, they're too dull, too dense, or, it's terribly upsetting and they're carrying a great heavy thing. It's just like, I just wanted a break from it, or that kind of thing. So I think the other person can tune in and be a bit more allowing of that. And conversely, if one of the parties does want to talk about the day and does want to vent for a bit, you could take that sort of let them approach to think about what that would look like, why that's useful, how they could be helpful, and also for how long. Like, how long are we talking? Because it's really different if somebody just wants to say something to you for a few minutes and discharge some feeling, or if they're still talking about it 20 minutes later, or God forbid 2 hours later.
Yeah, good. I think that is a nice place to finish. Mel Robbins managed to eke out 300 words based on a 2-word statement. We've eked out 30 minutes of high-end podcasts content.
That's why she's absurdly successful, Graham.
Yeah, that's why she's getting the money and we're not. Okay. Well, you can email us at crazyinlovepodcastuk@gmail.com, and we'll see you again soon. Bye, Matt.
Cheers. Good night.